Happy Friday, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Well, the best laid plans sometimes go awry. We were expecting Graca Machel, the second wife and widow of Nelson Mandela, as our guest. We got notice late yesterday that Ms. Machel was delayed, so we had to switch gears. No worries, today we depend on you, our audience, to be our guest. Let's talk about mending race relations. What do you think individuals can do to lessen the divide? Call us at 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Another View is next, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. We had planned to have a great conversation with Graca Machel, an international leader in the fight against illiteracy, poor education, and social injustice, and a champion for women's rights. She is also the second wife and widow of Nelson Mandela. She was coming to Norfolk to be a part of the first ever Mandela Summer Institute at Norfolk State University, a program that fosters academic relationships between South African students and NSU students. Unfortunately, something delayed her travel, so today we thought we'd open up the phone lines and let you, our audience, be our guests. We want to talk about mending race relations. We'd like to hear your thoughts on what we as individuals can do to close the racial divide in our country. Give us a call at 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. I'll give those numbers again, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Joining me in the studio to make sure I'm not sitting here talking to myself is Another View favorite. Dr. Eric Claville is a history and political science professor at Hampton University. Hi, Eric. How are you?
Hi, Barbara.
I know. Thank you so much for stepping in at the last minute. We appreciate it. But I think this is a conversation that people have been wanting to have. When I talk to people, outside of the radio, they seem to have some really good ideas. So I'm hoping we get some positive ways that we can make a difference in race relations. I want to play a clip first from President Obama about his feelings about where we are in this country in terms of race.
You believe that race relations in this country are better, stronger?
I think that they are better. My kids and your kids are growing up in an America where the attitudes of the next generation make you hopeful.
Should we be hopeful? What do you think, Eric?
Well, I think the president makes a very good point where our kids are growing up in a society where the next generation, and I want to put emphasis on the next generation where their ideals, values, and so forth are going to be very different from ours. I was just telling my wife this morning, I was speaking with someone, and they, older person, they made the statement, I wonder what this world is going to be like, for this generation coming up. And and I thought about that for a moment. I said, every generation says that.
That's true. That's a good point.
But what ends up happening is that the next generation, that world is being created for them. So we do have individuals that have a different perspective on race relations than my generation, other generations in the 50s, the 60s, and the like. However, race is hatred and love is learned, okay? And you do have those individuals that did not vote for the president because of his race, that are instilling those principles and that hatred into their children and to the individuals that are around them. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have a segment of racism. You're going to have a segment of elitism, which I believe is just as worse as racism for this next generation coming up. Will it be better? Yes, it will be better. But as it relates to what we're seeing and as far as the reactions of people to the president, what we're seeing in the streets and things of that nature, is basically an uncovering what's been happening and how people have been feeling for years.
Exactly, and now it's starting to boil over a little bit based on some circumstances that have happened particularly between the African American community and the police,
Yes.
and also the whole idea of poverty and all those things that go with that. And because more African Americans find themselves in the poverty line as opposed to the middle class, there's that correlation also.
It is. As a matter of fact, there was a great study done. It was a commentary that I was listening to on NPR, as I listen to quite a bit, where it looked at the public policy as it relates to housing, especially in the Baltimore area, where Mitt Romney's father, when he was over HUD during that time period, he was saying that this policy has to change, because if it doesn't change, then we're going to create a generation that's not going to be able to access opportunity. And of course, he was pushed out of his job because that's what the public policy was really created for. But I think the nuts and bolts, we could see the legacy of racism in public policy. We could see the nuts of racism in institutionalized policing on the streets. And we'll talk about that more later. But it's in the policy, and it's going to take policy to change.
Before we take some calls, and our phone lines are lit up, which makes me very happy. But I want to ask you also, because since you're in the classroom, in the college classroom, when I talk to our interns here at Another View, for example, they will say, they've come in and they've said, Miss Barbara, you guys are just old-fashioned. You baby boomers need to let this 60s thing go. Things are much better for us, et cetera. Then when they graduate and they get out into the world and they come back and they start trying to climb the ladder of corporate success and so forth, they come back and they say, okay, now we understand what you were talking about. I mean, how do we encourage our young people to kind of keep moving forward and keep being positive, even though they have to face some things sometimes?
Well, just like we do in the courtroom, tell the truth and nothing but the truth. So help you God. We have to tell them the truth and keep it real with them. Say, listen, your education is going to open up opportunities and doors for you. But this is the reality. The power structure in our society right now, in this point in time in man's history, because it changes over time, is still heavily dominated by white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, okay? Period. And it's not that many women at the top. It's not that many individuals of color. And power is never given. It's always taken. And you have to understand and learn how to play whatever game that you're in, whether it's in corporate world, whether it's in athletics, whether it's in the classroom education and so forth. And you have to be resilient. You have to be mindful. You have to be cognizant that these things are going to take place. You have to realize that people are not going to like you for what you say, how bold you are, how right you are, okay? Because that's where elitism comes in. We knew you were good, but we didn't think you were that good, okay? You were supposed to be helping you. You're not supposed to be helping us. So we have to be honest with our young people. We have to tell them this is the way it is and be cognizant of it and keep moving forward. And at the same time, what I keep in my mind and tell my two young sons is don't worry about everyone else, okay? Because as you climb up mountains, there's only room for only so many and really one at the top. So you have to understand that people are going to hold you back. They're going to say ill things about you. And it may be individuals that look like you, maybe individuals that don't look like you, maybe individuals you thought were your friends, and those individuals that you know are your enemies. But keep climbing and stay focused on your goal, your purpose, your calling, and keep moving, and you'll be successful.
Absolutely. Let's go to our phone lines, 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. We're talking about what can we do as individuals to close the racial gap in the country, right here in Hampton Roads and elsewhere. Sabrina joins us from Portsmouth. Hi, Sabrina. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you for hosting this forum and for the opportunity to share. I do agree with your guest that, racism is a learned art, by way of hatred or, intolerance. And it's also learned maybe even subliminally by lack of exposure to various cultures. So what we can do as individuals, for those of us who have young children or grandparents who have children, is expose our children to various cultures, outside of the home, in the home, even the books. I mean, most of the books for maybe the majority Anglo-Saxon, all they see is Caucasians in those books. They can see other minorities in the book to expose them to other minorities at an early age. Also, what we can do as far as adults in the community is get involved, particularly with the recent clashes with the police force, to get involved with your police academy. I happen to be a member of my police academy, and when we're involved, we're a voice. We're able to educate. We're able to expose the chief of police or whomever's holding the meeting, and in my case, the chief of police, to our community and our community needs. So that is just one element of what we can do as individuals.
That is a great idea, Sabrina. Thank you so much for sharing that. As a matter of fact, I know that Chief Goldsmith here in Norfolk just conducted, I believe it was this week, a Citizens Academy talking exactly about what you're saying. So thank you so much for sharing that. Let's go to Katie in Hampton. Hi, Katie. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara. Full disclosure, I'm actually a white female living in Hampton. I grew up in Texas in a community, it was a Dallas suburb where there was absolutely no diversity whatsoever. In a graduating class of 600, less than 50 students were African American. The military brought me here to Hampton, where literally I am the only white female in my entire apartment building. I, as a white female, am a minority. But there's been no difference. And my mother actually pointed that out to me, saying there's no difference with the way I carry myself with others or interact with others. And I think that's just because whether you're black, white, Asian, Latino, whatever, for me, it starts with a simple hello. It starts with engaging conversation, whether that's engaging with your neighbor or with a police officer or with a business owner. That's how it begins. Instead of acting like one race or another is one that you should turn your head away from, tell them good morning. Ask how their day is going. Certainly, for me, that's how I've approached it because that's how my mother taught me. And 2 weeks ago, I had surgery and was bedridden for a while. And literally every neighbor that I had came to my apartment to offer to take out my trash, do my dishes, walk my dog. And for me, if everyone just started with a simple hello or engaging in conversation, I think that would be a huge step to becoming one community instead of all these little different, racial groups and these different communities throughout Hampton Roads.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie, so much for that call. And, she's absolutely right. A lot of times when people become afraid or they take on a stereotype simply because they've never actually taken the time to talk to somebody different, Eric.
Barbara, you're exactly right. I agree with both your callers. You mentioned the Nelson Mandela Institute and his second wife coming. One of the changing moments in my life was when I had an opportunity to meet Nelson Mandela and have lunch with him when he visited our university at Southern University, when we renamed our school after him. And someone asked him a question. They said, how could you be so composed and have such love for people that imprison you for 27 and a half years? And he sat there, and one statement he made that really helped to change the way I look at the world itself, coupled with what I was taught by my father and so forth. He said, when I was in prison, I had white South African guards that treated me fairly. When I was in prison, I had white South African guards that treated me poorly. He said, I chose in myself, when I get out, to work with those people that treat me fairly and want to work with me. So there are people out there that accept you for who you are and will work with you. But as the caller stated, it starts with a simple hello. And again, sometimes you have to fight against what you were taught, again, through public policy, which is created to control beliefs, people, and resources. Those beliefs that, separate but equal, that's very hard to get that mindset out of individuals in the belief because it was put into practice, where whites receive the best and blacks receive the worst or the lesser than. So you have to push yourself. As in the first caller, when she talked about exposure to cultures, it's very true. One of those courses I took in college that, you had to take and, everyone just wanted to get through it was cultural geography. But I never forget the professor. He gave us a term called your cultural mental map. And it forced me to look at the world, not as geographical drawn lines, which are politically drawn lines to control resources and people, but as cultures intersecting with each other, and how, the Arabian Peninsula helped to influence the eastern region of Africa, and how the Moors influenced the food and the culture of Spain and Portugal. So now you start to look at individuals not by, their color. You start to look at individuals by their culture and how they help to influence what we enjoy today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's go. Well, let me give the phone number one more time. I know if you get a busy signal, just keep calling in because the phones are lit up. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Maureen joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Maureen.
Hi.
Go ahead with your comment.
I just wanted to say that I grew up and I was very Irish, and I've always been very proud of being Irish, and I've always been very proud of accepting people for who they are. And I did a DNA test and sent it into National Geographic, and was not surprised because I know everybody comes out of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And when my DNA showed that 425,000 years ago, my DNA came out of East Africa, it did not shock me.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so neat to find out that it was East Africa. And I think if everybody would just come to realize all of humanity came out of Africa, we are all the same. We have different body types. We have different hair colors, different skin colors.
Mm-hmm.
But please, we are all the same.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Maureen. We appreciate that. A lot of people have done their DNA testing and they're finding out that, again, something we've already known, which is that the origins of the country, of the world, started in Africa.
That is true. I mean, even if you look at of Christian genealogy, the Garden of Eden was placed between the Euphrates and the Tigris River. Look where there it is on the map. It's in the same place. So yeah, the birthplace of the world is in Africa itself. And also, one thing the other caller mentioned, she mentioned, being the only minority or person
living
of color.
Living in her apartment complex.
Well, first of all, I don't like to use the word minority because every word carries a certain belief with it. And even when you say that there is a majority minority, that still gives a connotation that person is less than the majority that are not in the large number. So therefore, I like to use people of color. Okay. So, coming into this next generation, the world has to, especially the United States, have to get used to the new normal, that there are going to be more people of color in this country than non-people of color, okay? But we also have to look at the economic, okay, the economic structure, the home ownership structure, and the like. Because policy prevented people of color from buying life insurance, okay, up until the 50s. Individuals were able to buy burial policies, but not life insurance.
Yeah.
Individuals are not able to buy homes. If they had the money to buy homes, they will buy them in areas that were sectioned out or redlined by banks and the Chamber of Commerce in those areas, which was the study about Baltimore that was done. Then their worth and their wealth was basically declined, and it was less than white individuals that were able to buy outside of that area. So, even though we're going to have a new norm, more people of color, the economic structure is still going to be heavily favored toward white individuals of the country because public policy favored them, but it is changing drastically.
Okay, let's see. Furkan, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, from Norfolk. How are you?
Yes, Barb. Thanks. Yes, Barb. Thank you so much. Let me just a quick three quick points. First of all, I think that the black man and woman in the United States need to get the full knowledge of themselves and start studying and reading more and studying their roots and culture, because our history, as you know, as the brother said, didn't start in America. It all started in Africa. First. Second of all, you have to understand, I think our people in this country should admit and accept that the root cause of this subject of racism. Now, obviously, we didn't cause this problem. So and what caused it and who caused it. So we need to study that factor. And then the last part, once we come to that truth, then we have to understand from a global perspective that when anybody makes a mess, I remember growing up and I made a mess in the kitchen or whatever. And my mother was like, look, who made that mess? And I'll be like, me. She'll be like, well, clean it up. I'm not cleaning up your mess. So the mess that the Europeans who enslaved us and all this racial stuff, since they caused the mess, obviously, who likes to clean up their own mess? So this is why I think it's very difficult for our people to clean up ourselves in this racial issue because, you know, we didn't cause the mess, and I don't think nobody likes to clean up somebody else's mess.
Okay.
And I think that's those three factors has to be applied mentally, particularly in the black man and woman's mentality here in the United States.
Okay, Farrakhan, thank you so much for your call. So he's saying we need to educate ourselves more, both sides, so that we understand our history, we understand where we're coming from, and then we try to work, as he put it, to clean up the mess.
Sure. Yeah, he's exactly right on those points, and I will address it from the bottom up. As it relates to cleaning up your own mess, keep in mind that first it starts with acceptance. He accepted when his mother asked him, who made this mess? He said, I did it. So therefore, he then accepted responsibility to clean it up. Slavery and racism in America is the biggest black eye that this country has, okay? And we have to get past it. We have to deal with it first, but America has to accept it first. We have a great opportunity in 2019 where we have the 400-year commemoration of the first 20 enslaved persons that arrived here in America and that were transported up to Jamestown settlement. Mm-hmm. We have an opportunity to do that. It was done through the Holocaust in Germany, where they have a time of reconciliation. It was done in South Africa, where they have a time for reconciliation that was ushered in by Nelson Mandela when he and de Klerk transferred peaceful power when he won the presidency there. So it's America's turn. And if we do it in America, you know, the rest of the world will take notice.
We'll take notice from there. You know, speaking of slavery, you bring this up. I got an email from Stephen Corneliuson, who has called me out on several occasions about about the whole Fort Monroe controversy and making it a national park and so forth. And he wrote an email. Stephen, I'm going to tell you now, it's too long for me to read the entire thing. However, he does say slavery is a hugely painful topic. People don't like to talk about it. People don't like to remember it. But paradoxically, people also don't like to have the Civil War remembered without slavery at the center. And he says that we still think of enslaved Americans as slaves instead of as human individuals with human dignity that even slavery could not erase. We think of the moral criminals who enslaved them as masters and the slave labor farms where they were oppressed as genteel plantations. And most of all, we think of enslaved Americans as having been passive, feckless, helpless people who simply waited for emancipation. Yet, as Fort Monroe shows, none of that is true. He goes on to say that if you want to talk about something truthful about race relations, let's talk about Fort Monroe and the sorry situation that has been caused there by politicians of both parties and by black leaders' passive negligence about it. Let's talk about what the self-emancipators show about the real truth of those enslaved Americans' individuality and dignity. He says you want to contribute to racial health, help get Fort Monroe back into the hands of its owners, all Americans, and out of the hands of developers, etc. And he tells me if I'm ready to talk to him, he's ready to listen, and I can start by reading the above on the air. So, Stephen, I hear you loud and clear, and that is a conversation that continues to go on. And Eric, you brought up a very good point in terms of us understanding, again, where our history starts and accepting the fact that that's where our history starts. Let's see. Lisa, which line should we go to? Let's go to line 1. Hi, Mark. You're calling from Norfolk.
Good afternoon. Enjoy your show as always.
Thank you.
The previous caller, took some of my thunder, but I can certainly pivot off of what he said. I just to reiterate, is that one, there has to be a national apology, a national acknowledgement from the highest seat that the country has to offer. Second is the gentleman also said, Mr. Farrakhan said, is that something that we shy away from is reparations, reparative justice. and there were other minorities in history, and I'm not going to compare who went through the most or who endured the most pain, but let's just say there were other groups that received reparations, and not a word was ever said, and anybody with any human strain in their body would recognize that that was the appropriate thing to do. And just to piggyback on the last thing what Mr. Farrakhan was saying, and what Minister Farrakhan pointed to, which was, I think, this right on point. He was talking about, yes, this happened generations ago. And yes, many of your listeners, if they listen, if they're European descent, they're saying, well, that was my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. And Minister Farrakhan basically put it this way, which was right on point. He said O.J. Simpson went to a criminal trial, and then he was found innocent in the criminal trial. But then when he went to the civil trial, they said you might not have been guilty of the murder, but we're going to find you responsible in the civil trial. And we know how that story went out. So although the current European did not have a direct hand into slavery, into all the atrocities, we still must show them responsible. And until we, one, get the apology, and then two, find the reparative justice to meet those national crimes, it's never going to be right. And we can talk to the cows come home. Okay. There has to be an apology.
Okay,
and
Mark, I'm going to have to cut you off because I want to
sh-
make sure that we get everybody in, but I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you calling us to make the point. An apology, Eric, what do you think?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I said it before, it has to be acceptance. I mean, even you can't ever receive salvation from Jesus unless you accept your sins. I when people make that argument, say, "Oh no, we don't need to do it." I like to bring up the Adam and Eve response. Don't give an Adam or Cain response. When God came down and approached Adam, God asked Adam what he did.
Exactly.
Adam said, "What about her?" Right? It was her. He said, "I didn't ask you about her. I asked you about you."
Yeah.
So we have to look at ourselves.
And we all have to look at ourselves.
Right.
Hold on one second. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Dr. Eric Claville with Hampton University and you, our audience, about ways individuals can mend the racial divide in this country. Let's see. Do we have... okay. Let's go to Phil in Virginia Beach. Hi, Phil. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara. I want to congratulate you on your service as MC last night.
Oh, thank you.
Safe Harbor Awards and Children's Harbor. And in fact, it's Children's Harbor that we can look to address the issue which you're discussing today. My two oldest children attended Children's Harbor pre-K. And if we could just see what goes on there each day, it's children of all races who look at skin color about as important as eye color. And it's astounding when you watch it because you realize that it's not until we acquire our ignorance as older people that we take on these biases that these children just don't see. And I know this sounds idealistic, but, we truly can learn from children. And, in fact, Barbara, you and Kathy Lewis should have a show dedicated to Children's Harbor one day.
Okay, I hear you, Phil. Definitely, and thank you very much. Last night's event was a wonderful event. They gave away the Anchor Awards, which were awards for people who really spend time working in children's rights and taking care of children. But the point, we all know, little kids, 2, 3 years old, they play together. They don't describe themselves as color. It is a learned behavior. Yes. And until we can get to a point where we stop teaching that behavior, it's going to be more difficult to close that gap.
Barbara, you're exactly right. And I go back and think about how my father started to explain the race issue to me. And it wasn't until I had my first negative experience with race where then he said, "Son, let's sit down and talk." And I remember the Learning Tree came on television, and
I remember that movie.
And we came home from school. It was like, sit down, guys. I want you guys to watch this. And I didn't know what the Learning Tree was, but we watched it, and I saw some things take place in it. And I mimicked that with my sons and talking with them about race itself. Of course, let life take its course, but have guidance, become educated, and be cognizant of it. One thing I want to mention very quickly, the last caller stated, and it's about the legacy of colonization across the world. What you see in what is called now the global South, it used to be called the developing world, but everything below the equator is a direct result of European colonization, or what I call the pillaging, the taking over of the world. If you look at the geographical lines of the continent of Africa, those were created at what we call the Race for Africa. It was a meeting that was held by colonial powers at that time that put the map of Africa on the table, and they divided it up. And those individuals, those tribes, because the continent of Africa is really made up of different tribes and nations. So for example, like in the country of Nigeria, you have 10 different tribes, that existed during that particular time and still do some remnants of it. So those individuals, though they're in the country of Nigeria, they belong to a different tribe or a different nation state, for their identity. So the legacy of what you see of those European powers coming to those areas of the continent of Africa and the rest of the world, taking the resources, setting up a power structure there, and when quote unquote freedom came to those nations, they took everything and went back to the European nations, basically leaving them with a mess. So yes, those European countries, those powers that really divided up Africa and utilized their resources for several hundred years, do have a responsibility to work with those governments to get them back on their footing. And also, you talked about the legacy of slavery. Yes, I believe that slavery itself was a business, American slavery. It was a business decision. The founding fathers saw how much money that they were making, that they could make with human cargo, and outside of their religious convictions,
they made the money.
Right. The root of all evil is the love of money. Okay. So they made that decision, not looking long term on the legacy that it will have. So yes, the person 5 generations past slavery did not participate in it or was not the cause of it, but there is a direct benefit of the way the country was created, the way our Constitution was written, where it only gave white individuals, white males at that particular time, the ability to own property and also to participate in the government process, and giving persons of color a less human status. Not animals, but not quite humans, but 3/5 of a person, so in between that. And lastly, as it relates to reparations, I believe that reparations can be taken care of through public policy, what I call the 3 E's, through the elimination of what we call the slavery loophole in the 13th Amendment, also through education and economic development and empowerment of people that were citizens, that were the direct descendants of slaves. When I talk about the slavery loophole in the 13th Amendment, slavery still exists. The Constitution allows it. It is legal in the 13th Amendment. And it states that no slavery or involuntary servitude, except for punishment of crimes, shall exist, okay?
So that's what's going on in the prison.
That's what's going on in the prison system. So the corporate prison system of America offered cash to buy these prisoners because it is legal to enslave these persons and work them basically the way that slaves were worked during that particular time. So that's why you see chain gangs. That's why you see private prison. I've talked about this before. There's been book.
What's the name of the new Jim Crow?
The new Jim Crow. Machel. Yeah, she wrote that book and talks about it. And it's in public policy. Okay, when prisons were taken over by private corporations, they were taken over primarily. Again, they're business owned. The number one objective of a private business is to make money.
Absolutely.
You can't make money unless you have butts in the bed.
Okay, let's go to Stephen in Hudgens, Virginia. Hi, Stephen. You're on the air.
Hi, how are you today?
Okay, how you doing? Good.
I just wanted to make a point. I'm from Iowa.
Uh-huh.
And I moved out here to take care of my mother, who is 84 years old. in a very small community in the middle of nowhere that is very mixed.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not seen any tensions at all in the community. I'm trying to figure out, is that a rural dynamic or is that an urban dynamic?
That's a good question. Let me ask Eric what he thinks. How about that? Okay. Thanks, Stephen, for the call. What do you think? Is there a difference? And I think some people growing up in rural South would say that they absolutely did face some some racist activity in the South. So
now he did mention Iowa.
Yeah.
Okay, so Iowa's a little different from what we call the traditional South. As a matter of fact, you'll find during the time of separate but equal, a lot of African Americans could not attend higher education institution in their states to get doctorate degrees. So a lot of individuals were paid to go to other states that would accept them. University of Iowa accepted a lot of those individuals.
Really?
There are a lot of African Americans with PhDs that graduated from University of Iowa.
So maybe Iowans are a little more tolerant.
You know, it's
than
again
the rest of the country.
Again, that Midwest headed toward, once you pass Missouri and all of that,
Right.
it's a little different. Plus, there is also, when you don't have a legacy of slavery. Okay, Iowa didn't have a legacy of slavery like the slave holding states of the South, and they didn't participate so much in battling in the Civil War, in eliminating slavery. Okay, so therefore the perspective is a little different, and there were other states like Michigan as well. There exists a town in Michigan where there was always integration, even in the 50s in the school system, and then in the 40s. You have black farmers that have land, and you have towns that had black sheriffs and during that particular time period. So there are states that you have certain parts, mostly in rural areas, where it's a little different his history as it relates to racial relations. But for the most part, you're going to find it here.
Absolutely. Doug joins us from Suffolk. Hi, Doug. You're on the air.
Hi. I just want to bring up, I heard a great talk yesterday on NPR about one of the biggest racial and really socioeconomic divides stems from federal policy that really your average American doesn't even know about previous to the Freedom of Housing Act and food freedoms and all these things that stem from federal policy that trickle down to local policy, and this is where we are now with such a divide, and I don't even really know where we could go.
Where we go from here. Okay, we'll talk about this, Doug. Thanks so much for your call. We appreciate it. That's exactly what you've been talking about. When policy is set, that sets the tone. I want to bring up something that I hear a lot of non-African Americans say.
Sure.
And that is, you all are so sensitive. You get offended by the slightest thing. It's not meant as a slight, but you make everything racial. Okay? I want to play a clip from the principal in Atlanta this past week, who made a statement during the graduation ceremony. Let's listen, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
You people are being so rude to not listen to this speech. It was my fault that we missed it in the program. Look who's leaving, all the black people.
So what she said, I know is a little difficult with all the noise, but she said, people are being rude. They're not listening to the speaker. It was her fault for taking it out of the program. And look who's leaving, all the black people. Now, people were offended by that. And not only, my understanding is not only did black people leave, but also white people left because of that. Do you think we're too sensitive sometimes?
Well, there's a saying that says, out of the abundance of the heart doth the mouth speak. Okay, so individuals say things that they really have deep in their hearts. And when the pressure comes, that's when individuals, you see what's really on the inside. If you take an apple and squeeze it, put it under pressure, you're going to get apple juice.
Mm-hmm.
If you take an orange and squeeze it, you're going to get orange juice. So when pressure comes, you're going to see what's really inside of a person. As it relates to the sensitivity of African Americans, and keep in mind, keep in mind that everything in America was created from the very inception to benefit white Americans, okay? Everything, and it was supported on the backs of blacks, all right? From whether it be the economics, whether it be, anything. So with that being the case, if you look at advertisement, let's just go with people, most attractive person or beautiful people, 100.
Okay.
You go through that and you see mostly white people. Okay. If you look at the products for hair and things of that nature, you see for white people. If you look at the models on the runway and what is considered beautiful, you see white people. Okay. And then when you associate things with poverty, you associate things with negativity, you always see black people.
Black men in handcuffs.
Exactly. Black men in handcuffs, or what was coined the welfare mother, and things of that nature. So there is a high sensitivity because, since the inception of this country, blacks were looked upon as being negative, being less than. So, and whites were thought to be better than them. It was public policy created it. So therefore, there's going to be a sensitivity when you say certain things that are really you shouldn't say.
Words do matter. Diana joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Diana. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you. You had asked at the beginning of the program what we as individuals can do to help heal racial relations. And I believe that when we make eye contact intentionally with each person we encounter, whether it's on the sidewalk, the mall, a restaurant, a meeting, or any place, when we make eye contact with another person, usually that leads to a smile. And with the smile, we create a little heart connection. And when we create that heart connection, the fear dissolves. And I just think that's a very simple thing that we can all do every day, because it's fear that drives all of these problems.
And, Diana, I want to ask you a question, because I think you bring up an excellent point, and I think you're right. Eye contact and smile does help. But my question to you is, do you know where the fear comes from in the first place? Do you know what I mean?
I do. And I believe that part of it is that we have been programmed to fear people that look different from ourselves. But I think most of it is the programming. The culture has, I don't know how to say this in words, but historically there has been, and I've heard on your program, African American males speak about how they can tell that people fear them sometimes, and it's such a disconnect that I don't know where the fear comes, but it's an absence, obviously, of mutual respect
and understanding of the other person, perhaps.
Yes, absolutely, and the fear is it's like a memory loss of who we really are. We're all in this grand adventure together, and we need each other, and we have. Well, I could go on and on.
Okay, and you know what? Our phone lines are jammed, so I want to get some other people on. But Diana, thank you so much, and thank you for your honesty. I really appreciate that, because that's part of this issue. We've got to be honest with each other in terms of our conversation. John joins us from Exmoor, Virginia. Hi, John.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me, and I listen to your show every week.
Thank you.
First thing, I feel like as a nation, until this is resolved, we aren't going to reach our full potential. And then I'd like to say I grew up in a small town in the Northeast, so race relations weren't really an issue. It was mostly Caucasian people. But then I moved to Fort Myers, Florida, and down there I moved into a poorer neighborhood because that's all I could afford, and there's shootings, high levels of unemployment, African-American men yelling at their children, stuff that I was just not aware of. And I think some of this, I'm a Caucasian person, but I feel like as much as I need to take responsibility for, even though none of my ancestors were here when slavery was going on, I think African American people need to take some responsibility also and try and take the high road as much as possible. I don't know how to say that in the best way, but
no, you just said it absolutely in the way that you feel, and I think that's a point that we were getting to that we can talk about here. John, we appreciate your call and your honesty. Thank you. We do need to take some responsibility. Do you not believe that, Eric?
Yeah, but John also mentions a very important point, where he mentioned African Americans need to take the high road. So it's always in every situation where the oppressed, once you retaliate, you're looked upon as the bad person, but not the person that slapped you. So, it's the person that retaliated after being slapped. So there has to be a responsibility there, and I believe in collective and personal responsibility. But at the same time, he did mention cultural differences. And there are things that we do in our culture, that are different from white people.
That is very true.
And there's nothing wrong with it as far as, the way we gather together, the way we talk with each other, things of that nature. Now, when it starts to... Now, when you inject lack of education, you inject poverty, you inject drug use, and also unemployment, now you get a certain type of behavior that is detrimental to everyone involved. And that also exists in what is the traditional poor areas of neighborhoods, which are for whites, which are considered trailer parks, as opposed to public housing for blacks. And again, these are traditional areas of poverty where you find these types of people. I was talking with a good friend of mine who's a retired Border Patrol officer at Federal, and he mentioned, he went to an area in the Southwest. And he said the exact same thing he saw in the poor black neighborhoods, or the exact same thing that existed in the Southwest neighborhoods where there were no black people.
Well, and what's interesting is when we say there's two schools of thought even within the black community. So Bill Cosby says, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, stop buying the $200 tennis shoes, and others took that as blaming the victim.
Sure.
And so we've got to find that right balance, I think.
Yeah, and what ends up happening when people like that think they have solutions, they end up, lecturing individuals. Nobody wants to be lectured to. I think about the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus made and his ministry as Jesus the man. He went to people showing them a better way, but his approach was, hey, I have a way that can help you. If you believe that you want to be helped, then follow me and I'll show you a better way. And when individuals make those type of statements, you end up pushing people away, not listening to your message. And also, I think individuals that reach that type of status, such as Mr. Cosby and others, they forget what it was like to pull themselves up, and that they weren't the only ones pulling themselves up or holding themselves up. So we have to remember as we also extend a hand to them.
Absolutely. Joe joins us from Richmond. Hi, Joe. You're on the air.
Hey,
Joe?
thanks for having me.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. Basically, you had a previous caller who had described a situation in which he had spilled some mess on the floor, and then his mom had, held him responsible for cleaning it up.
Right.
And I just wanted to throw in a quick thing about how in my house things were just a little bit different. So we had a family rule that was everyone helps with everything until everything is done. And so I basically, I guess, I'll try not to ramble too much here on the air, but basically, I guess I feel like it's really, really, really important for Americans of European descent to acknowledge all of the privilege and all of the status that they have and the wealth that they have that comes basically as an inheritance of the atrocious behavior of their ancestors, and that obligates them to attempt to try and work as hard as they can to fix the situation. But in some ways, though, I like part of what I didn't like about that comment is it makes it almost seem like there's no amount of responsibility to be taken on the part of the African American community, and I think that their responsibilities are obviously very different because their role in history has been very different. But and I don't think that it's my place to even begin to speculate on what those responsibilities might be. Like, I feel like as a Caucasian person, it's my job to try and figure out how I'm responsible for the situation and how I should best work, what I can best do to help, repair the situation as it exists today. But I guess I just didn't like the idea I basically think that every person
it shouldn't be one-sided. You think it needs to be both sides? It should be both-sided, not one-sided, is the bottom line. Okay, Joe, thanks so much. We appreciate your calling us from Richmond. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge something that Joe said about acknowledging white privilege. I mean, he's right on point. And again, that is the legacy of the benefit of slavery that whites have. And, they have to be able to acknowledge that. Because I'm white, I'm able to have, I'm able to have so many opportunities. Now, what Joe fails to realize is that blacks have been at the forefront of trying to repair the legacy of slavery and racism in this country. I mean, remember the 60s? I think there were a lot of black people out there marching, getting beat in the heads with billy clubs. Congressman John Lewis, who was our commencement speaker at Hampton, was one of those. Peaceful marches at that. It was Martin Luther King that was there, the one that had his life taken because he was fighting for rights of others. And we forget about Ella Baker, we forget about Rosa Parks, and even before that time, Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, all these individuals were behind the scenes trying to push America to repair the legacy of slavery and racism. So there has been a collective effort on in every generation of African Americans to repair, and we've taken responsibility and more of the brunt and holding up the pillars to try to repair this.
Okay, let's get Lynette from Norfolk. Hi, Lynette, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you. I wanted to comment on what the woman said earlier about the eye contact thing. I think what wasn't coming across maybe that she maybe meant or something that I practice is when I'm just walking down the street and I do see another person coming towards me, no matter who it is. When you make eye contact with someone, you're acknowledging that they exist. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm crying over it, but I think that's the power of it. That this is so silly, but it is. I think that people, or at least many of my friends who are African American, they feel like people aren't hearing them and seeing them, and that's my point.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynette, for calling. And that is, we are out of time. Can you believe that how quickly everything has gone by? That is just incredible. Thank you to everyone who called in. Yes. Those of you who we could not get to, we're sorry, but send us a note on Facebook and let us know your thoughts. And Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it, and we'll be right back. You're listening to The Thrill Is Gone by legendary B.B. King. The famed guitarist passed away last night at the age of 89. King battled type 2 diabetes for more than 20 years. B.B. King was an icon in the music industry. He started his career as a disc jockey in Memphis, Tennessee. He cut his first record in 1949, which led to a long, successful career. King won 15 Grammys with hits such as Paying the Cost to Be the Boss, Lucille, and Hummingbird, just to name a few. He was an artist who definitely had an impact on the music industry, and B.B. King will surely be missed. And believe it or not, we are out of time for our show today. Thank you to everyone who called in for sharing your ideas on ways to bring the races together. If you want to hear this show again, go to our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. Next week, it's Another View on Health with Dr. Keith Newby. We'll talk with author Hope Warshaw, who has written the book Eat Out, Eat Well, a guide to healthy eating in any restaurant. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Chantel Davis answered our phones and produced our segment on B.B. King. I'm Barbara Hamley. Make it a fantastic weekend, everyone. Make that eye contact and smile. Let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.